try this by trial and error. Okay, here's the steps that you would take to approach this problem. Okay, you would look to see, again, your binomial factors here. What different factors of 12x squared could you have as your first terms here? Because again, this has to be the product of our first terms here and here. Okay, so if you look at all the different possibilities, we have x and 12x, we have 2x and 6x, we have 3x and 4x, and then it just recycles back to the same ones, right? 4x and 3x, which is already written there. So those are the potential first terms. Our potential last terms have to have a product of -6. Okay, so if we look at the possibilities that we need to test for that, we have a -1 and a +6, +1 and -6. We have a -2 and a +3, +2 or -3. We have a -3 and a +2, +3 and -2. And then finally we have a -6, +1, +6, -1. So those are all the different combinations you would have to check if you're going to do this by hand. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to show you an alternate method that you could attempt here to get the answer. It may take a little bit longer work sometimes or to understand it, but you're never going to waste your work. Your work is always going to lead directly to the correct answer. Okay, so let me talk through this process. Okay, it's called factor by grouping. Okay, so I'm going to take this same problem that would take you, again, if you looked at this, all these combinations, 2, 4, 6, 8, you're talking, I don't know, 24, over 20 different combinations you'd have to test. Okay, and you can perform a set of steps that will instantly give you, or will directly give you the answer. You're not going to waste any work. Okay, so let's take a look at what the steps are when you factor by grouping. Okay, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to find the product of the leading coefficient times the constant, a times c. Okay, so remember, you're looking at ax squared plus bx plus c. So you're going to take the product of your leading coefficient times your constant. So 12 times a -6. The sign carries with it. What is 12 times -6? Okay, -72, right? So there's your first step. Once you have that product, what you're going to do is you're going to find factors of this quantity, a times c, whose sum is the middle term's value, b. Okay, so we're going to look for, are there any factors of -72 whose sum is this middle term's coefficient, -1? So what factors of -72 equal -1? And what two numbers multiply to give you -72, add to give you -1? So -72 is equal to -9 and a +8, right? Okay, so those are your factors. Okay, what you're then going to do is you're going to rewrite your middle term as the sum of these factors. Okay, so this -x is now going to be rewritten -9x and a +8x. That still gives you a whole value of -1x, right, or -x. So I haven't changed the value at all. I simply changed the form. I rewrote my middle term. Okay, now in this same step, I am going to drop down my first and last term. And so this is going to create an expression with 4 terms. And once I get to this step where I rewrite the middle term, I'm now going to factor by grouping. So my very next step will be the factor by grouping step. And that involves removing any common factors from each pair. Okay, so pair meaning a set of 2. So when I look at this first set of 2, what common factors can I remove from these first 2 terms here? What common factor goes into both 12x squared and negative 9x? A 3 and a x, right? So we remove that common factor. When we remove a 3x from 12x squared, what's left? 4x. And when we remove a 3x from negative 9x, what's left? A negative 3. And now we can move to the second pair of terms. Whatever the sign is right here, that'll always carry down. What common factor can I remove from both 8x and a negative 6? A 2. So take out a positive 2. When you take out a 2 from 8x, what are you left with? 4x. And when you take a 2 out of a negative 6, what are you left with? Negative 3. Okay, now, if you've done this right, what you should be able to do on this is you should be able to now factor out a common binomial factor. Okay, so we're going to remove a common binomial factor. Okay, so here this common binomial factor is the 4x minus 3. So I'm going to take that out. And what's left in my first group is a 3x. And in my second group, I'm left with a plus 2. That gives me my remaining binomial factor, and that is my solution. Okay, so 4x minus 3 times 3x plus 2 would be my factors. Okay, now, I'll come back to this in a second, but if I had done it here, I get 3x plus 2 and 4x minus 3. I wouldn't have found them until I was almost done. I would have gone through 8, 16, 17, 18, 19. I would have gone through 20 before I found the correct one. Whereas here, even though it takes, or the steps, it's always consistent. You're always going to go through this number of steps, but it'll always lead you directly to your solution. And now, what happens if, when I rewrote my middle term, what if I didn't see it as negative 9x plus 8x? What if I saw it the other way around? What if I saw it as 8x, a plus 8x, and a minus 9x? Would that affect the answer? So if I drop down my first and last terms, and I factor by grouping, I'm going to group each pair of terms. What common factor could I remove from the first pair if I wrote it this way? Take out a 4x. When I remove a 4x from 12x squared, that leaves me a 3x. Removing a 4x from plus 8x leaves a 2. Whatever sign this is always going to be removed. What common factor can you remove from a negative 9x minus 6? Take out a common factor of negative 3. So to remove a negative 3 from negative 9x, you're left with 3x. Remove a negative 3 from negative 6, you're left with a plus 2. So you still have your common binomial factor. We're going to remove that. 3x plus 2. We're left with a 4x in our first group and a negative 3 in our second group. And so it still is the same thing. It's just switching the factors around. And so you can use, it doesn't matter which order you write when you rewrite the middle term, it will work for that. Right. So if you approach this using that method, you look at your A times C value. So what's 4 times 6? 24. Are there two factors of positive 24 whose sum is positive 11? Plus 8 and plus 3. So if we rewrite this middle term as the sum of those, and then just drop our first and last terms down. So we drop the 4x squared, drop the plus 6. And so all we've done here is we've rewritten the middle term as two separate terms. It still is equal to 11x. And now we're going to factor by grouping. So what common factor can we remove from this first pair of terms? Take out a 4x. That leaves an x plus 2. What common factor can you remove from the second pair? A 3. Still leaving an x plus 2. If you've done it right, you should have this repeating binomial factor. We're going to remove that repeating binomial factor. And then we'll see what's left. We're left with a 4x and a plus 3. And so that forms the remaining factor.